as Bryan Kohberger pleads guilty to stabbing four University of Idaho students to death.
What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. Like, share, subscribe, comment. I just should talk about it on the video, and we're just gonna hop right into it. So today we will be talking about Bryan Kohberger. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the name Bryan Kohberger is the man who is now has admitted to murdering the four University of Idaho students in Moscow, Idaho. So if you're unfamiliar with this case, basically what ended up happening is I'll give you more details about it in what I'm about to talk about. But basically what ended up happening, he went into these home and he stabbed four University of Idaho students to death, 3 women, 1 man. And yeah, so this happened in 2022, November 13th of 2022. Okay, this happened in November of 2022. So obviously, he got arrested in the case, and that things like that take time. So he finally did enter a guilty plea today. Obviously the guilty plea is amended. So the guilty plea helped him, miss execution by firing squad. I'm assuming, I don't know. I didn't know Idaho still, I didn't even know America still allowed that. In all honesty. So Idaho still does executions by firing squad. Actually, this is actually a new legislation. So as he says, Idaho is the first state in the nation to designate the firing squad as its preferred method. So I'm thinking that's an old thing. No, it's a new thing. So that's nuts. But he was going to be one of the first people getting executed by firing squad. But his guilty plea has saved him, and so he will probably be getting life in prison. His sentencing hasn't been said yet, but he's definitely probably getting life in prison. Let's not think about it. So let's get into the details of what this man actually did, because basically we kind of can figure out the exact details and layout of it, but it's still a little lost on it. So first, let me say this. Bryan Kohberger was pursuing his PhD in criminology at Washington State University, which is about a 15-minute drive from Moscow, Idaho, which I didn't even know that Idaho and Washington touch like that, but that's not a point. But so remember that, because I think that's important for later and things of what I'm going to talk about. But he was studying his PhD in criminology, so that should tell you a lot about what kind of nigga you're dealing with. So what we're saying, the victims are Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Conches. Boy, I'm sorry if I apologize if I'm jacking their names up. Ethan Chapman and Zaina Kernoodle. So those are the 4 victims. So getting in details of what they're saying he did. To begin with, they're saying they believe he had been, planning to do something like this for nearly 6 months. They don't know exactly. So he did in November 22. So they're saying nearly March, April of 2022, he had been planning to do something like this. No, I did my math wrong. May, June of 2022, he was planning to do something like this. So where they say the plotting begins is he ordered a knife off of Amazon, the knife that would be later a Caban knife that would later, obviously be used in the case, even though they never found the murder weapon. That is, going from the evidence, that looks like that's the knife that was used in the case. Okay, so he didn't move to Pullman, Washington, because he was living in Pennsylvania with his parents. He didn't move to Pullman, Washington. Obviously, he was studying criminology in Washington State University, so you gotta live in the area. It said by early July, 6 months before the murders, Kohberger's phone had begun pinging off of cell phone towers that served that house, but only during odd hours of the night. So that tells you he was probably, scaping it out. Now, that doesn't mean he exactly was going to, he was plotting on them specifically. It's just knowing that he was plotting to do something like this to somebody in that relative area, because it only pinged off of their house. So They said between July and the night of the November murders, Kohberger's phone pinged off that tower 23 times between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. So this was something he obviously thought about. It said he had no evidence that he had ever had direct contact with his victims during that time, but obviously, like I said, this is something he plotted and thought about. Like I said, it's not obvious if it was plotting on them specifically the whole time or he just was in that area thinking this was a good area for it. Okay, so they said on the day of it, Kohlberger's phone was powered off in Pullman around 2 a.m., but before being turned back on in the Moscow area just around 5 a.m., disappearing from the cellular grid at the exact time he was hacking his victims to. Well, that's a crazy way to describe it, but so obviously what they're saying during that time he drove from Pullman, Washington to Moscow, Idaho, and did what he did. He said, and then it says the evidence, like security footage, clearly showed the vehicle in by houses and things of that sort. So then they said he was wearing a dark face mask by a house camera. Well, I don't know why I said it like that, but they say he was wearing a dark face mask. He slipped into the home using the kitchen sliding door around 4 a.m. He then climbed to the home's third floor where he used the 7-inch K-bar blade that I said he purchased off of Amazon, where he first killed Mogan and Conchis, who were both, 21-year-olds, college students who obviously they were asleep alongside of each other. And then there he left his knife sheath, the thing that you put the knife in. It had his DNA on it, so that's one of the one of the ways that they caught him and knew that it was him. Then they said he left out the room where he encountered Kernoodle on the stairs, and then he murdered her right where she stood because she was going to pick up a DoorDash or things of that sort. So he caught her on the stairs and killed her right there, which is crazy. He then slipped into her bedroom where her boyfriend, 20-year-old Chapman, the only male, like I said, was sleeping, and he killed him in his sleep. So, yeah. That should tell you. So then they said, so it was 6 people in the house that night. They left two. He left two alive and untouched. One of them did see him, but they only really caught a glimpse of him. Said a man with the bushy eyebrows was exiting the home, and that's really all they knew. And then it said cell phone records indicated he was back home in Pullman around 5:30 a.m. And then they also were able to see he drove back to the victims' homes around 9 a.m. Cell phone records show, but by 9:30 a.m. he was back home and taking a bizarre photo of himself in the bathroom. So obviously, if you are familiar with criminal cases and things of that sort, um, people like this always like to revisit the scene of the crime. I don't know exactly what's the exact psychological pattern behind that or the reasoning for that, but we know criminals like this always like to revisit the crime scene. So that's another way you tell he did it. Okay, so then after that, they said it was evident he was trying to desperately cover his tracks. So he took a trip to Lewiston, Idaho, which is, they said, a town that is filled with rivers and fast moving water, which they believe where the murder weapon got dumped, but it was never found, like I said. But they were able to put it together from Amazon searches and things of that sort that he had ordered a knife previously. They said he also, right after it happened, had also began searching online for another knife and sheath and tried in vain to delete his purchase history on Amazon. So probably he was Googling how to delete purchase history and all things of that sort. But I wonder if him ordering a new knife and sheath, was he planning on doing this again? They said he also changed his car registration from Pennsylvania to Idaho, and they said in an apparent attempt to throw investigators off his trail. I don't know exactly how they would have threw off his trail because that would have showed he was in the area. So I don't know his thinking around it. And then they said he carried on with his life after that. So after they another thing that caught him, they were able to pull DNA off a Q-tip that tests believe was that proved was related to the DNA found on the sheath left by Mogan's blooded body. So they matched the DNA because obviously he's, if you seen the nigga and things of that sort. I mean, if you seen his energy, he does look like a weird ass nigga that would do some shit like this. He is very stoic and awkward, but he, so obviously he doesn't, his DNA and things in that system, but obviously they was going to have to figure out how to match up his DNA some way, somehow. So that he tried to they said his car had pretty much been disassembled internally. So obviously, he was obviously, he probably he stabbed these people. So there was a lot of blood going on, and also definitely a lot of blood on him at close range. So his car was fucked when he got in there because he did it and then hot right in the car. So this fresh blood, that shit was everywhere. So he had to try to. It said it was scrubbed absurdly clean. So there was an obvious reason for that. And so then they said he called on his own criminological studies to cover up his crime. And he said he had just recently written a paper on crime scene analysts where he talked about covers up and things of that sort. So it's a lot of things. His sentencing is set for July 23rd. So it's a lot of things on the evidence list that is pointing towards him. The DNA, the obviously the cell phone thing and cutting it off at a certain time and criminology. So there's a lot of things pointing at him, obviously. So he knew it was over with, so that's why he took the guilty plea. The guilty plea saved him from a firing squad. But now he is going to have to most likely serve the rest of his life in prison. So it's this was a very publicized case just because of the gruesomeness of it and basically somebody, basically four college students that you definitely wouldn't think go out. One is Idaho. Shit like this don't always happen. It's actually Moscow, Idaho at that. And it's just not a group you think this would typically happen to. So it's a crazy thing, but shit, it's really over with now. So we just really gonna see when he gets sentenced. So that's all I gotta say though. Like, share, subscribe, comment. I just talk about Neville, and we out.